So before I start this episode, I want to apologise. I currently have a cold, so my voice is going to sound a little worse than it usually does, but hopefully you can still understand me. Anyway, I was going to do another Origin episode this week, but since the last episode technically had like 3 or 4 Origins in it, I thought this week I would talk about something different. Comic book adaptations. No, not those ones. What I mean by comic book adaptations is similar to what people usually mean when they say film adaptations. Basically, a comic book that is based on or derived from a different piece of art, whether it be a book or a movie, so on. Now, I'm not sure why, probably because no one knows what to call them, but these comic book adaptations are not really talked about much. A lot of people don't even know there's such a thing as a comic book adaptation, and many who do often disregard them. But I'm here to tell you that comic book adaptation is real and it's awesome. The one example most of you might know is video game comics. There are a ton of these, and they just keep on coming. Jack even touched on one in a previous episode of Game Talk. These comics can just retell the story from the video game, such as in the Metal Gear Solid comic, or they can even extend the universe and fill in gaps that were not touched on by the game. Some notable examples of this are the Mass Effect comics that touch on the events between Mass Effect 1 and 2, and they even explain the origins of the elusive man. But even though it's getting to a point where every story-centric video game has a comic book, they're not the only forms of comic book adaptation. A popular trend is to adapt films and TV shows into comic books. The obvious advantage of adapting a live-action piece into a comic book is the fact that the story is no longer limited by the budget, really. Never has this been done better than in the comic based on 2001: A Space Odyssey. The film, which itself was inspired by a short story, is one of the most visually ambitious of its time, but it still couldn't pull off what you can do in a comic book, especially when the comic is created by the legendary artist Jack Kirby. But what about animation? You could achieve just as much, if not more, in animation than you can with comics. This is true, but sometimes comics can expand on animated stories that would be over otherwise. Take Avatar, for example. After the climax of Aang's story, the people behind Avatar wanted to move their efforts onto a new generation with Legend of Korra. This is great, but there is still so much potential for stories to be told with Aang and his friends. So they told those stories, and continue to do so through and beyond the production of Legend of Korra in comic book form. And the final type I want to talk about is comic books based on novels. Now, on the surface, this seems pretty obvious. Books don't have pictures, so retell the story of the book, but add artwork, which, to be fair, has been done in comics such as the saga of Darren Shan. But what is really interesting is when comics take a classic novel and add a sprinkle of that comic booky twist. For example, we all know the story of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Frankenstein tries to create life and ends up creating a monster. Well, the people over at DC Comics thought, what if Frankenstein's monster, after being given life, swam to America and joined a secret government agency? Well, obviously that would be awesome. And it would be even better if that agency was called something cool, like SHADE. And this is why I love adaptation of any kind, not just comic books. With a new form of medium and a fresh perspective, something great can become a whole new shade of great. I've been Cameron Morris, and this was Comic Talk.
Oh, it's nice to be here. Peace and quiet, away from that fucker Cameron.
You can't just laugh! You can't just call him a fucker and then laugh!
I don't want to do that, change my mind.